Welcome to my channel, That Carnivore Life. My name is Emily, and today I'm going to be talking to you about fat, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But first, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe, like this video, and if you hit that bell notification, you'll get notified of each upload that I do. Why am I talking about fat today? It's widely believed by many people, doctors and non-doctors alike, that eating fat leads to and/or causes high cholesterol, obesity, so weight gain, and heart disease, specifically saturated fats. What is a saturated fat? Here's the deal. They tend to be solid at room temperature. They're found in sweet and savory foods, mostly from animal sources such as meat, dairy, and in some plants such as palm and coconut oils. This was found via nhs.uk using a Google search, so that's something that you can find yourself. I also looked at the AHA, the American Heart Association. They state basically the same thing, but they're a little bit more specific. They state high fat dairy and eggs. Now let me just talk about high fat dairy for the moment. Not necessarily the dairy itself, just the term high fat dairy. If you think about it, no one takes dairy and adds fat to it. We don't take milk or cheese or cream and add extra fat. It just contains the fat that it came with. But when we're referring to low fat or skim-based dairy products, fat content has been removed. So therefore, I would say that they're actually referring to regular fat dairy or just dairy as opposed to low fat or no fat. I would say that high fat is actually an incorrect or an inappropriate term. Not that that really matters, but just thought I'd share that. So saturated fats, we know that they're basically from animal products. Non-saturated fats, what are they and how do they differ from saturated fats? They're unsaturated fats. They break down into two categories, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. They're found in foods such as avocados, their oils, olive and their oils, peanut butter and peanut oil, veggie oils, fatty fish, nuts, and seeds. Then we have trans fats. They're liquid form, but they convert to solid form during food processing techniques. They can be found in cookies, crackers, donuts, fried foods. Many experts believe that we should be eating lots and lots of whole grains with large amounts of skim or low-fat milk and fruit juices, and avoiding saturated fats. Remember, saturated fats are found mostly in animals. When you think about eating an animal, when you go to the butcher and get meat, there's very little processing done to that meat. In talking about this topic today, I know we've already started, but I want you to apply common sense to this subject. So I think it's important that we look at the definition of common sense. The definition described by Webster.com states sound and prudent judgment based on a simple perception of the situational facts. So we want to apply common sense as we look at this today. Let's compare 100 years ago to now on a few topics within this topic of fat. Please use your search engines to educate yourself. I'll talk about education more a little bit later, but please just use that. So doing a basic Google search revealed that the common diet in the USA in 1920, so 100 years ago, consists of mainly meat and potatoes, with large amounts of time involved with preparation and cleanup. 44 hours a week is the estimated time frame, over 7 days, over 3 meals, 2 hours per meal. If you think about going and getting takeaway, not much you do there with preparation or cleanup. I know for me, I am cooking for 1, maybe 2 or 3 people at a time. And it's as simple as going and getting a bagged lettuce with pre-made croutons in there, a dressing packet, and then you go and you get a rotisserie chicken, or maybe you pick up a ready-made lasagna, you pop it in the oven, you throw your bag salad together, pop it on the plate, and you're done, and then dishes in the dishwasher. Very little preparation. Even when you're cooking a roast, again, very little preparation, maybe a little bit more in the cleanup, but not 2 hours worth. That's one thing that I found is 1, the diet consisted mainly of meat, veggies, potato. 2, there was a lot more time that went into the preparation and the cleanup of the meal. Then I looked at the typical lifespan 100 years ago compared to now. Back then, it was in the age range of about 50. Today, it's 70 to 80. Now, we know with statistics, finding the age range of, say, 50, isn't that every single person that died at the age of 50. Some people lived to 100. Some people died at the age of 3. So this is an average. I wondered how the average was so low back then if they were supposedly eating a better diet, as many people on a carnivore diet or a paleo diet or a keto diet will claim. And I also wondered if they were dying younger then and we're living older now. Has that come about because we're now eating less meat, more fruits and vegetables, more grains, more sugars? I wanted to know what was actually causing the increase in the average lifespan. I decided to look at the common causes of death then, comparing to the common causes of death now, and see what those causes of death were. When I read through these, keep in mind that there have been major advancements in the way our medical field runs. So major medical advances in the equipment that we have, diagnostic and treatment and prevention. New research has been uncovered on different things, better ways, like there used to be open heart surgery and now keyhole surgery, just an example of the advancements. Deaths during the labor of a baby were quite large back then, and they're now very minimal now, again, because of medical advancements. 100 years ago, pneumonia or the flu, that was the top reason people were dying. 202.2% of deaths. Today, 12.3%. It's a huge drop and a really big indication of how beneficial the advancements medically speaking have been. Tuberculosis, 194.4%. Today, it's not even in the top 10. It was 0. That's not to say people aren't dying from tuberculosis. It's saying it's not in the top 10. Gastrointestinal infections, 142.7% 100 years ago. Today, not in the top 10. Heart disease, listen to this, 137.4% 100 years ago. Today, 161.5%. That's the first increase we've seen in these statistics. Brain disease, 100 years ago, 106.9%, not in the top 10 today. Nephropathy, 100 years ago, 88.6%. Today, 12.7%. These next two, these are the last two, they're really interesting. I left a couple of things out of the top 10 just because I didn't think they needed to be included. They weren't diet related. Cancer, 64% of deaths that were listed in the top 10 100 years ago. Today, 146.2%. Stroke, not in the top 10 100 years ago. Today, 37% of deaths attributed, so it's in the top 10. Heart disease, cancer and stroke all increased compared to 100 years ago, and stroke made it into the top 10. You've got to wonder, with all the advances in the medical world and the massive effect it had in decreasing those other mentioned conditions, why it didn't with heart disease, cancer and stroke, why they increased. Like, why didn't they even stay the same? You got to wonder about that. These three, heart disease, cancer and stroke, are commonly related back to food, especially fats. But I wonder if they're actually being attributed to the correct foods and the correct fats. Where cancer is concerned, I'm sure some people are going to say, what about what we put on our bodies? Agreed. There are skincare products, fragrances that we know and that we're learning about are not actually good for our skin and can cause cancer. Sunscreen. A lot of people are saying, and there's been studies done that apparently prove that sun causes cancer. What if it's the sunscreen and the toxins in the sunscreen that is actually causing the cancer? And such a rise in skin cancer because we're told to slip, slop, slap, so we're not getting the vitamin D that we need. Now, I'm not saying go out and get sunburnt. And don't get me started on this whole thing because I don't know fully where I sit with the whole sunscreen cancer, not cancer thing. There are people who say that the sun causes cancer and people saying sun cream causes cancer. All I'm saying related to this is I'm not going to say that the reason stroke went from not being in the top 10 to being in the top 10 attributing to 30% of deaths is solely solely related to our diet. It may not be, nor am I going to say the massive increase in cancer is solely related to our diet. It may not be, which in a moment when I talk about a particular study is kind of what the doctor did. He didn't consider other factors when he drew his conclusion. And that's all I'm saying here is let's keep our minds open to other factors. Let's use common sense when we look at these statistics. But I think it's really interesting that the only 3 in the top 10 that didn't decrease or remain the same, they actually increased, can all be attributed to food. Fat is fat, or is it? Is fat fat? We actually just reviewed the difference between 4 different types of fats. Saturated fats, unsaturated fats, broken down into mono and polyunsaturated fats, and then trans fats. You already know fat isn't fat. There's different kinds. When we think about the fat that we carry on and in our body, is it the same as the fat that we consume? If we think that it is, we're actually choosing ignorance. The fat we consume is not the same as the fat inside our body, despite it having the same label. Some of you think I would be nuts if I believed that the fat I consumed was the same as the fat in my body, and actually you'd be correct. The problem is many of us believe that if we eat fat, we get fat, but it's actually not that simple because fat isn't just fat. It's not all the same. Let's think about a farmer for a moment. If a farmer wanted to fatten his livestock and you told him to feed them butter, eggs, and meat, bacon, for example, he would laugh at you because he knows that's not how they would get fat. Now, yes, they're not a human being, so they wouldn't typically eat that or haven't typically eaten that, 200 years ago. Let's look at cows for a moment. Their natural diet is grass. They're going to choose grass over anything else the whole time. So if you tell a farmer to just shove grass down their throat to fatten them up, he's going to laugh at you because it's not going to work. When a farmer wants to fatten his livestock, he feeds them grains and corn and in large quantities. That's how a farmer fattens their livestock. It's how cows get fattened. Now, don't laugh at me just yet because I know a cow is not a human. I just mentioned that. But we for years and years and years have been testing products on animals in laboratories to identify whether or not it's safe to use on humans. So why can't we do that with this? Why can't we consider that to fatten livestock, an animal, you feed them lots of grains, and yet to fatten a human, we say you have to give them fat? That just, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. After all, humans are animals. To me, this isn't logical that to fatten a human, you would feed them fat when that is what we've naturally eaten for years. We know that. We were hunters. We hunted our food. I mentioned before, I hinted that I was going to talk about a study. Dr. Ansell specifically, he published in 1978 the 7-country study. Now I want to talk about that for a minute because that study actually contained many flaws. Specifically one really big flaw, which is the flaw that I want to talk about today. He concluded in his study that eating saturated fats, remember that's mainly found in animal products, is linked to rising blood cholesterol, which is linked to heart disease. He collected data from 22 countries, but published data from only 7 countries. Why would you do that? It's been noted since regarding Dr. Ansell study that the data from the other 15 countries that were left off doesn't support the hypothesis of saturated fat consumption leading to high cholesterol leading to heart disease. But whatever the reason Ansell had for leaving the data from the 15 countries out, it was an intentional decision not to include them. He had 22 countries' data and yet he only used 7. That was an intentional decision. He received grants of $200,000 per year from the United States Public Health Service. This study was done over several years previous to 1978. That's $200,000 is a lot of money back then, and that was over a number of years. Like any organization and any business, the United States Public Health Service, they needed to show or present or produce, whatever language you want to use, outcomes for the money that they spend. That is one reason why some people say that that organization, the Public Health Service, jumped on the bandwagon of agreeing with the conclusion Ansell made, despite the massive flaw of not including the data from every country he collected data from. Sub-trials continued based off his study. These sub-trials were for the purpose of proving Dr. Ansell Keys' publication as true, as opposed to searching out if the conclusion was true or not. Why wouldn't someone want to find out the truth? I know for me, truth is really important and I'm constantly looking for the truth. So why would these people want to prove something that's false is true? And if they didn't, why wouldn't they want to make sure that truth is true? They're not giving out false information, especially when it affects people's health. These studies also lumped trans fats and saturated fats together, despite these not being the same. Trans fats are found in things like margarine, highly processed. We know this is manufactured and not naturally occurring. Lumping these two fats together taints the research. They're not the same fats. I don't believe Dr. Keys was intentional to cause harm to people. I believe that he wanted to help humankind, but he made a really terrible mistake, leaving out 15 of the 22 countries that he collected data from. Resulted in one of the biggest medical misinformations of all time. You could also call it a myth or a lie. He cherry-picked data from 7 countries out of 22 and never apologized and never corrected his study or his publication. Let's just take a slight detour for a moment and talk about our brains. They consist of nearly 60% fat. Over half of our brain is fat, and about 20% of the cholesterol in our body is in the brain. That's actually the highest level of cholesterol in our body is located in the brain. The rest of it is spread out between everything else, but the largest concentration of cholesterol found in our brain. Now, you can find this information on ncbi.nim.nih.gov. So a Google search will help you find this information. Actually wonder what would happen if we stopped feeding our bodies foods that contain good fats. Without this fat, life as we know it would actually be really different. It may not even be possible. For example, the signaling that occurs between cells that make up our bodies would be hugely affected. This has been a known medical fact actually for decades medical fact in the medical world. So why would doctors all of a sudden just blindly, it seems, believe that we all of a sudden need to switch to consuming low fat? Like, that's weird. I don't know. Do you think it's weird? I came across this quote by Dr. Ken Berry. Eating fat won't make you fat, but eating sugar and starches will. I thought that was a really interesting fact. I remember being a child growing up in the 90s. Yes, we ate things like white bread, but I remember rarely being allowed to eat takeaways, lollies, candies, cakes. They were unhealthy. They were considered unhealthy and so were only a treat on occasion. We also used sugar very sparingly and we were encouraged to eat lots of meats, fruits, and vegetables. I actually don't see that happening a lot in today's day and age. I do see it. I just don't see it happening a lot. 100 years ago, let's go back 100 years ago for a moment again. Humans cooked with tallow and lard, not oils or spray oils. We cooked with tallow and lard. Heart attacks in patients under 70 were unheard of, and obesity was incredibly rare. Dr. Ansell Keys. Reviewing his study, his research, it can be found that sugar consumption is actually more correlated to heart disease than fat consumption, meaning sugar consumption is more likely to cause heart disease than fat consumption. This fact was present in all 22 countries, not just the 7 that Ansell Keys included in his study. This was stated by the researcher who reviewed Keys' study. You can go on Google, you can find Keys' study, and you can review it. That's enough about Keys' study, at least for now. We might revisit it another time. Let's talk about doctors for a moment. If a doctor tells you to eat less fat and exercise more, but they're not open to discussion or exploring other options, please get other doctors' opinions, maybe even change your doctor. We're all unique human beings. We all require different things. For example, some of us are allergic to peanuts, some of us aren't. Therefore, treatment for one person may not necessarily be able to be a blanket treatment for all people. So if your doctor is telling you one thing and they're not open to discussion, get other opinions. And if need be, based on what happens after those other opinions, maybe change your doctor. Sounds like I'm telling you not to listen to your doctor. That's not true. Why should we listen to our doctor? Doctors are fantastic for immediate medical needs and mechanical medical needs. They're meant to be helpful for all medical needs, which includes general health, so nutritional health. So things such as appendicitis, broken bones, accidents, they're great for. Excellent. You don't muck around with those things. Go to your doctor. Nowadays, unfortunately, these doctors are rarely beneficial for nutritional advice. nutritionist. It is widely known that the amount of time that goes into studying nutrition when a doctor is going through school for years and years and years is incredibly minimal. Any great doctor actually believes in educating his patient or her patient. Let's actually be sure that we are educating ourselves, and from multiple sources and from the source. So yes, use Google and Google Scholar, but read the entire article and draw your own conclusion. Don't base your conclusion off the given conclusion. Use common sense here and look at the whole thing. Look at all of the information, because often the conclusion is actually really different to what the study has shown. And we would see that with Dr. Ansell Keys had the entire 22 countries been included. The other thing that I'll say here is when you find articles, especially on things like on search engines, Google is a search engine. So when you find an article and you're reading through it and it's referring to other articles, so it's like someone's opinion of another article, go to the source, go to that article, find out if it's the source. If it's not the source, find out the source. Find the source and read the source. Don't just rely on somebody else's opinion. And that's why I stated earlier, you can jump on Google and you can find Dr. Ansell Keys' study and you can review it for yourself, not just blindly take what I'm saying as truth. Here are some great resources for you to review as well. There's about 4 books I can tell you of. The Lies My Doctor Told Me by Dr. Ken Berry. Eat the Yolk, so like egg yolk, by Dr. Liz Wolfe. There's an E on the end of Wolfe. The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet, and that's by Nina Teichholz, Teichholz. And last book that I would recommend is Eat Fat, Get Thin, Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health by Mark Hyman. And then YouTube channels, YouTubers. Dr. Ken Berry, his wife, has a channel as well. Nisha Loves It. Steak and Butter Girl. She was actually a vegan for years. Overnight flipped to 100% carnivore, and her health has been completely transformed compared to her health as a vegan. Kelly Hogan, Laura Spath, and Michaela Peterson. We've talked about saturated fats coming from animals. We've talked about why the recommendation to eat low fat is probably not the best recommendation, nor is the recommendation to eat grains and sugars. I want to address why eat only animal. You can see that my channel is called That Carnivore Life. So from that, you can draw the conclusion that I'm a carnivore, and yes, that would be a great conclusion. I eat only animal. You might be saying, well, why not eat animals, fruits and vegetables? Like, fruits and vegetables are healthy, they're very minimally processed, especially when you eat the potato, not the potato chips. Well, let me say this. Some people don't tolerate some, most, or all plants. 2 people that I can point you to for more information about that, or who are perfect examples of people who basically don't tolerate all plants, are Michaela Peterson and Kelly Hogan. Remember, they have YouTube channels that you can look at. Another reason of why only animal, FODMAPs. Don't know if you've heard of the acronym FODMAP, FODMAP. It refers to fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. You might have heard somebody say that they can't eat fructose or fructose, depending. Actual termination is fructose. I was treated by the clinic of the lady who identified it. Her name is Dr. Sue Shepherd, and it's fructose and fructans and FODMAPs. Just to clarify. Now, these are what is often called a sugar alcohol or a sugar. They're a short chain carbohydrate. It's something that the small intestine absorbs poorly or malabsorbs. An example of fruits and vegetables, they're on a spectrum, I guess you could say. Some are high FODMAPs, nil FODMAP, like they zero out, or break even, you could say, and low FODMAP, so a negative, meaning that they're not high FODMAPs, they're not going to cause an issue. An example of this would be watermelon. That is really high in the FODMAP polyol, and yet zucchini is really low in FODMAPs. Someone might not be able to eat watermelon, but they can eat zucchini. They might not be able to eat apples, but they can eat tomatoes. So that's just sort of a bit of an example of FODMAPs. I also want to give another example of why not plants. Plants being fruits and vegetables, grains. Poison ivy. Let's let's talk about that for a moment. Poison ivy is organic, it's naturally occurring, and it's not processed. We all know that we cannot consume poison ivy. We also know that if we touch poison ivy, we are likely to get a very nasty rash. And yet there's some people that don't get that rash. They actually have a higher tolerance. Peanut allergies. I can eat peanuts totally fine. Other people eat peanuts, they get a bit of a bellyache. Some people eat peanuts, and unless they get an EpiPen within seconds, they're dead. We know from this, plants aren't always safe to eat. Fruit and vegetables aren't always safe to eat for everyone. And that is why some people choose to eat animal only or heavy animal product and barely any fruit and vegetables, very minimal and very specific types of fruits and vegetables. My personal experience, I'll go into great detail in a future vlog, but I actually started to get sick in mid-2011. By the end of 2011, I was diagnosed with multiple Fodmaps, not all of them, but multiple. And then early 2012, as I still wasn't better, further tests were done and I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I cut out even more from my diet. I cut out sugars, gluten was definitely cut out, and I did that for a year. I lost a lot of weight, I looked great, I was feeling a lot better overall, but it wasn't sustainable, and that was a real problem. And also being under the guidance of the dietitians hired by Dr. Sue Shepherd, it was made known to me by those experts that the Fodmap diet was only supposed to be an elimination diet. So you eat only low Fodmap foods, you eliminate all medium and high Fodmap foods for I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes a little longer. And then you tested a food and you tested the amount, and then you worked out if you were okay with that. If you were, you would try another food. If you weren't, you would remove that food for a few weeks, wait a few weeks, and then you would try a different food. So that's basically what I started to do, and I snuck more and more back in, and I thought I was okay, and for the most part I was. And then I added some extras in. Yeah, I was kind of getting away with it, but then it got to the middle of last year and I really wasn't. I was not doing okay. I was in a lot of pain. I had a lot of inflammation. I wasn't sleeping well. I had a lot of brain fog. I had zero motivation, and I wanted to eat everything. I was insatiable. It didn't matter if it was a bowl of steamed, unsalted broccoli. Like, I wanted to eat and eat all the time. Good food, healthy food. I had put on so much weight, it was ridiculous. And I was at my wit's end. I knew of one person eating carnivore, not another woman. It was actually a guy, a friend of mine. He'd been eating it for a year and completely transformed his life. So I messaged him and waited for his response. And while I did so, I jumped on YouTube and I did a lot of research on YouTube. I actually tried to find negatives on carnivore after watching several videos that seemed really positive. I'm like, surely there's got to be a hidden negative here. The negatives I found, I'm like, that's not a negative. Like, how is that a negative? It was bizarre. My friend got back to me and I decided I'm going to try this for 2 weeks. Anyway, 2 weeks in, I extended it to 30 days and then I went to 3 months and I was a completely different person. I lost a stack load of weight. I compromised and I let myself eat a little bit of sugar and then it went downhill from there. And I've changed where I've been living a couple of times and didn't have a lot of access to a kitchen, so needed to, as a result, was eating a lot of food out, and that meant that I added in pickles with my burgers and then I added in coleslaw with my burgers and then I had some ice cream, and so I just really wasn't sticking to carnivore for the most part of a year after those 3 months. I would do a week here and there, or I would eat mostly carnivore and then have a few snacks that weren't carnivore, and I have gotten back to the point where I'm really not doing great health-wise, have put weight back on, not the full amount of weight that I lost, but I have put weight back on, and I just decided I know carnivore is the best for me to eat, so eating animal only is the best for me to eat, so that's what I'm doing. And I decided that because it has transformed my life so much, I want to share that with you guys. And that's why this first video is addressing fat, because a carnivore way of eating, you eat a lot of fat. I eat the fat on my meat. I specifically buy fatty cuts of meat, or I ask my butcher to give me a cut of meat that hasn't had the fat removed. I also eat a lot of butter. I'm eating a lot of fat, and you know what? I actually lose lose a lot of weight. I don't put weight on unless I eat that ice cream. As kind of a conclusion, yes, eating only animal can make a person fat. Now, some carnivores are aiming for this, yet it's a lot less likely to make you fat. And I would ask this question: what about the general wellness of a fat carnivore compared to somebody who is fat, who eats a balanced diet? Grains, sugars, low-fat products, fruits and veggies, and some meat. What about the other factors in their health? Like, who is actually, aside from weight, if you've got a fat carnivore and a fat standard American diet eater, which is actually the healthier fat person? I would argue that the carnivore fat person is, but whatever. Why is a carnivore less likely to be fat? Well, it's a lot harder to overeat when you're eating protein and fat, meat and fat. A lot harder. You'll be fine eating, and all of a sudden you'll be like, I can't eat one more mouthful, I'm gonna vomit. Like, you hit that I'm full mark like this. Then there's the dairy consumption. Now, when I was reviewing how to eat carnivore online on YouTube and just written articles, what I came across most often was that dairy was like a little taste tester on the side, a small piece of cheese. They said if you're going to use a liquid form of dairy in, say, your tea or your coffee, have heavy full fat cream, not low fat cream. Again, it was like a splash. And when I were talking to other carnivores, the ones that wanted to put on weight to do so would eat a larger amount of dairy, or they would drink a glass of milk several times a week. Full fat milk, not low fat or skim. And so that's how they put weight on as a animal only eater. And then I also would say other medical conditions. That is also how a animal only eating person could put on weight. I just want to take a moment to say thank you for tuning into my channel. I ask you to please come back. I'm asking you to subscribe, but also to like this video and to select the bell notification so that you're aware of future uploads that I do. Thank you for watching my channel,